Hey guys, it's Amalia, and today I am coming at you from, as you can probably tell, my very messy kitchen, because I want to talk to you about some of the things you specifically would find in my kitchen as an Orthodox Jew. Let's get started. The most basic thing you will likely find in every Orthodox Jewish kitchen, that is, except maybe vegetarians and vegans, is two sets of dishes. Of pots and pans, basically everything you're going to find two of. This is my dairy frying pan. This is my meat frying pan. And basically that's pretty much the same for all cutlery, all dishes, all pans, any utensil. I guess I already said cutlery. There are two sets. There are a few exceptions. Some people will use glassware for both. It really depends on certain customs, but essentially, according to Jewish kashrut laws, one is required to have separate sets. One is required to keep meat and dairy separate, and that also applies to the utensils used to cook those items. I'll leave a link in the description where you can learn more about it on Chabad.org, just the basics. But that's the first thing you will find in my kitchen. And it definitely, as you can see, I don't have a very vast space. This wall behind me is the kitchen, the whole kitchen. There's not anything on the other side going on. So it definitely takes some being a little careful with storage, how much stuff I can buy, and also minimizing the amount of pots and dishes I need on both sides, both for meat and dairy. And also, let's not forget about our parv dishes, meaning our non-meat and non-dairy dishes. So it's it gets a little complicated, but we make it work, even though I will not open these cabinets for you and let it all pour out on you. Here we have the next item on our list. This is a hot water urn, specifically one designed with two sets of buttons, one for heating, one for boiling mode, and one for Shabbat mode. Essentially, as Orthodox Jews, the halacha, or Jewish law, requires that one is not able to actively start a cooking process on Shabbat. And what happens specific with most hot water urns, if they're not designed with a Shabbat mode like this one, is that when you take out water, the water then starts to reboil. And so a lot of them are designed specifically with a specific Shabbat mode, so that you can set it, and in that amount of time, it won't reboil when water comes out, because typically it will happen in order to fill that space, and make sure the water stays hot. I believe that's exactly how it works. I honestly am not particularly into electric appliances, so I'm not I don't know if that's the most accurate, but to my understanding and knowledge, that is why we need and have Shabbat modes on appliances like this. See, I drink a lot of tea, as you guys very well know on this channel, so this is very handy. Another item I want to touch on, because of its place in secular society as just a mainstream product, but also for its specific halachic uses, which I always find interesting, that combination of Jewish law, meaning products that already exist, and just using them in unexpected ways or for unexpected reasons. So the two products I want to talk about in that regard are my meat and dairy microwave covers, because as I mentioned, we need to have meat and dairy separate for everything. And so theoretically with these, the steam in the microwave, it's a priority that you can't have. Your microwave would theoretically turn meat or turn dairy if you did not have a cover on. Some people even have separate microwaves. There's a very varying halachic opinions. However, we use microwave covers, and we have one meat and one dairy. Some people just designate their microwave as meat and then only cover it for dairy. We opted to keep our microwave parv, just so that we can make things like popcorn in that lovely purple bowl that's sitting over there that I need to clean, and have that be a parv item. Essentially, we use sink racks because, as you can see right behind me, we only have one sink. And when you have a lot of Orthodox Jewish families, you will notice will have two sinks in their house, or one sink divided down the middle, so they can place their meat and dairy dishes in separate areas. And we don't have that, and it becomes a concern in kashrut, because you can't necessarily touch your plates, which are dairy, to the bottom of your metal sink. Metal in Jewish law is a material that can conduct can conduct meat or dairyness, or non-kosherness. I'm not being very clear in how I'm explaining this. I'm sorry. Like I said, it's a very complicated topic. And because of that, we need to put a sink rack down, because theoretically anything that goes under the sink rack, any of the, if I have cheese in my single sink, and then afterwards I have meat, theoretically the bottom of the sink that's metal can take in those dairy and meat particles, and this is in a halachic sense, it's not necessarily a scientific reality, can take in those dairy and meat particles. And so you need to elevate whatever meat or dairy dishes are going into your sink, instead of just putting them in the same in the same area. And so that's why we have actually two of these. My other one's in the sink right now. This is my meat one. And we just alternate them depending on what dishes we want to put in the sink. Next item, I actually find it kind of funny that I'm bringing it out to show you, because my current one just broke. So you're actually going to inspire me to look for the warranty so I can get a new one. It broke about a minute before Shabbos. For any Orthodox Jews, they know how stressful it can be when your hot plate breaks a minute before Shabbos. Essentially, due to various concerns within Orthodox Judaism towards cooking or looking like you are cooking on Shabbat, there are a few solutions people come to in order to still have hot food on Shabbat. One of them is this, which in Israel is called a plata, like a platter, and or in English is a hot plate. And also sometimes, even though this isn't really a blech, people will refer to this as a blech. A blech is more a piece of metal that goes on top of your burners, and you place everything on top of that, as opposed to this, which has a wire and is electric. Essentially, all of our food we cook before Shabbat, and then we simply place it on the hot plate when Shabbat comes in. Obviously, we're very careful about it in terms of fire safety. The smoke detector immediately above it. We never keep any towels or anything that could catch fire near the hot plate. And we're also very careful just about being conscious of any sounds coming from it or anything like that, because it's very important to us to stay safe, even when we have to use some appliances that otherwise during the week I likely would not love to leave on overnight. My next item, which is very common in Jewish homes, although funnily enough I actually didn't have one in my house growing up, is a crock pot. So, although crock pots are common just in any typical home in general, whether Orthodox Jewish or not, the significance of crock pots for Orthodox Jews is really that they're a very easy vessel to make the traditional Orthodox Ashkenazi Jewish dish of cholent. And in Hebrew it's called chamin. There's also variants of it in Sephardi culture as well. Essentially, cholent is kind of like a bean stew with beef in it, made deliberately because it can stay overnight in something like a crock pot or just in any big pot, and can last until the day and be eaten warm, despite the fact that typically you wouldn't be able to heat up a liquid during the day. And so the way my husband makes the cholent and the way he does it is simply he puts it all in on Friday afternoon, and then we get home from shul or synagogue on Saturday during the day on Shabbat, and he simply takes out the pot because you can't have it on the direct heating source as you're removing the food from it. That's a whole other kashrut issue. And simply serves it into a bowl and puts it on the table, and we have nice warm hot cholent, whereas we couldn't have put it on the hot plate morning of, and so crock pots are really a mainstay in a lot of Orthodox Jewish homes. Here is yet another example of the array of meat and dairy paraphernalia we have to have in the house. Here are our two Shabbat sponges, because certain wringing out actions are prohibited on Shabbat, and so these sponges actually don't ring. They're more like, I can't really explain it, but they're designed specifically that when you squeeze it, the water isn't going to just flow out. And then, so we have one meat and one dairy for Shabbat, and then we have our meat sponge for the weekdays, our dairy sponge, and our parv sponge. And yes, everything's very much color-coded in most Orthodox Jewish households. Typically, although it varies, typically like purples and reds are considered meats, and greens, blues, colors in that family are considered dairy. And finally, parv kind of is a no man's land. This could have been a dairy sponge, it could have been a meat sponge. We chose to make it a parv sponge just because we got in a pack that was different than our other sponges. You'll also notice in a lot of Jewish stores, or also just in Israel in general, where it's more common to keep kosher, you'll find sponges sold specifically in these types of color sets so that people have all of their sponges. And we also have like a red Brillo pad as well. I just took everything that was by the sink. But yes, we have an array of sponges that really take up a lot of space by our sink. The final product I'll just mention, although it really only applies again to the Orthodox Jewish community in Israel, and it may apply around the world as well. I'm just not familiar with it. I know that in America, you don't need to use it. However, here it's very relevant. Sifters. This one's an electric sifter. You see it's on. And this one's a hand sifter. Essentially, in Orthodox Judaism, there's a major concern for eating anything non-kosher. One of the things that is non-kosher are bugs. And so in general, obviously, we don't want to be eating bugs. It's kind of unhygienic. But beyond that, there's a serious halachic reason that people need to sift their flour as Orthodox Jews in Israel, because typically bugs are found more often than they are in the US. And so before I use any flour for baking, I typically will use this sifter. I used to use this one, and then I got tired of it. That's why I bought this one. And so I just sift my flour before baking, no matter what recipe it is. And it's funny to me because obviously I knew about sifting in the US, but it was never really something I thought of as like as a requirement to make my food better. Even when recipes said to sift, many times I would just skip that. And now I do it all the time. Future Amalia in editing here. Basically, this thing just didn't come out right when I was filming it last. So I just decided to film this part again. Basically, we're standing here right next to my Shemitah garbage. And essentially, this is kept right above my normal garbage. Typically, people like to refer to it as a Kedushat Shvit bin, rather as in like a holy produce of the 7th year bin, rather than a garbage, just because the produce in here has sanctity. And essentially, anytime we're living in every 7 years when living in Israel, there's a concept of Shemitah, which is the land is at rest. And so you can eat the produce, but the land there's a number of halachot and laws regarding it. One of them being that if you eat the produce of the land, any remnants of those produce need to be kept in a special bin until they go bad, and then you can dispose of them, because you don't want them rotting with your other produce. What's interesting, I haven't done it personally, but I've seen people convert this into a compost, because you are able to compost according to some opinions with it, which is pretty unique. But I'm pretty happy with my thing. I think it's a nice setup, and I think it looks very pretty, and like it's really cool for me as someone who didn't grow up with this at home in America, to come to Israel and to eat the produce of the 7th year, which is something you really learn about when you're in America and it doesn't apply to you, and finally it applies to me. And it's a really unique experience. Okay, there you have it. Those were some of the unique things that you can find in an Orthodox Jew's kitchen, or at least in this Orthodox Jew's kitchen. If you want to see any more content like this about my kitchen or about kosher recipes, anything kitchen related, definitely please ask for that in the comments. Let me know what would be interesting to you. And have a good one.